Hello and welcome to another episode of VAT Update from Tax Essentials for Advisors. I'm Ed Thompson. So, in this episode, we'll tackle 4 key developments from the last couple of weeks. First, we finally have clarity from HMRC on when and how some long-awaited changes will be made to the capital goods scheme. Second, we'll look at a Court of Appeal judgment on the education exemption, which is good news for some alternative education providers. Third, we'll look at a case on the old temporary reduced rate that was introduced in COVID, which might just have some read through to the new temporary reduced rate that we have this summer. And finally, our tax tip looks at partial exemption annual adjustments and some cash flow considerations around those. So let's get started. After a very long wait, we finally have an announcement from HMRC on some planned changes to the capital goods scheme. And we also have the legislation that underpins this. Better still, at long last, we have a date. So under the capital goods scheme, or CGS, businesses have to monitor how certain assets are used over a period of time and adjust their VAT recovery if there are changes in taxable use. From the 29th of July, the threshold for land and buildings jumps from £250,000 plus VAT to £600,000 plus VAT. And this means that fewer projects are going to fall into the capital goods scheme. And just a reminder that that threshold for land and buildings can apply to the purchase of an interest in a property itself, but it can also include large construction or renovation projects. Now, at the same time, computers and computer equipment drop out of the CGS entirely. That one is probably less significant, as you rarely, if ever, saw a computer within the scope of CGS anyway. It's worth noting that this 29th of July date is a key cliff edge date, and there doesn't appear to be any sort of transitional arrangements. So if that was or is incurred on those items before the 29th of July, the old regime will still apply. Next up is a Court of Appeal judgment in the education sector, which came as a surprise to some. Now, under a strict reading of the UK legislation, alternative providers, or APs, were excluded from the VAT exemption that universities and further education colleges enjoyed for basically the same courses. The VAT exemption for education relies on a supplier condition, which meant that only education provided by certain types of institution qualified for exemption. Now, both the first tier tribunal and the upper tribunal said that that exclusion was fine, but the Court of Appeal has now disagreed. It held that denying exemption to APs breached the EU principle of fiscal neutrality. The case is based upon pre-Brexit facts, so it's unclear whether the same argument would actually succeed on current facts, given that it was decided based on an EU law principle that now is up in question. But there's significant VAT at stake on the historic position for some education providers. A quick look at a first tier tribunal case on the temporary reduced VAT rate that applied during COVID. And although that might not sound particularly topical, I think it still matters because there are some obvious parallels here with the summer reduced rate that is in force at the moment. And in particular, we're looking at the concept of a right of admission. So this case involved private karaoke booths. The taxpayer argued that hiring a booth was a right of admission to an attraction, so the reduced rate should apply. But the tribunal disagreed. In its view, admission normally means access to a space for collective enjoyment. But in hiring a karaoke room, customers were paying for exclusive use of a private room. That wasn't a right of admission, and the reduced rate didn't apply. And finally, we'll close with a quick tax tip for partly exempt businesses. Now, at the end of each VAT year, when you're partly exempt, you need to complete a partial exemption annual adjustment. Basically, this corrects the provisional recovery that you've been using during the VAT year and replaces it with the final position based on full year figures. Now you've got two choices on timing of this adjustment. Include the adjustment in the final VAT return of the year, or include it in the first VAT return of the following VAT year. If the adjustment is in your favour, it's usually worth bringing the adjustment forward into that final return. What this means is that you accelerate the repayment and improve cash flow. That's everything for this episode. I look forward to presenting the next one in a couple of weeks' time.